G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to discuss with you why I'm at odds with evidence-based practice. And I know that may sound strange as a physiotherapist, but I've been seeing more recently this growing toxicity and culture around research that seems to be making our appreciation and application of research less than it should. So what I hope to achieve in this video is I hope to provide you with a broader perspective about what evidence-based practice actually is, why we use it, and how I've come to understand we need to think about these things to hopefully get the most out of them in an open-minded, mature, and responsible way. So let's get into it. So before we delve into this, I need to make it very clear from the outset that I 100% value evidence-based practice. It is a cornerstone and a foundation of what I do every day as a physiotherapist, and it needs to be. Research through evidence-based practice is something that helps us make sure that what we do with you and to you and advise you to do is both safe and effective. But like most things, it can be very easy for a lot of people to lose perspective and to lose the context that's necessary to stay true to those values. And with that in mind, I think the first and potentially most important thing to start with here is that evidence-based practice is not research alone. The evidence-based practice model is absolutely research, but it shares equal footing with clinical experience and patient experience. Research alone does not have the context necessary to directly apply it to each individual person. And in a perfect world, the research would show exactly the same thing that we find clinically, which should also line up perfectly with what you find with your lived experience as a patient. If it doesn't, then something about one or all of those three things is missing important context and information. And I think one of the biggest issues that I see with evidence-based practice at the moment is that most of the general public and a lot of the members of the medical and healthcare industry put all of their focus on research. There's show me the research culture, where your opinion becomes less valid if you can't show someone a piece of research to support that. A can fall down if research hasn't even been conducted on that yet, or if the research sucks. And one of the main reasons why I felt compelled to make a video on this very topic is the toxicity and the closed-mindedness that can surround research in isolation can very easily miss important context that gives that research meaning. And that important context in theory can only come from clinical experience and experience as a patient. And while research always shows what research shows, and when we look into the research method and how they've conducted that research, we might be able to poke some holes in how they've come to that conclusion. But ultimately, we need to respect every piece of research that's put in front of us. But we need to pause at that point before careering down a certain path to go looking for clinical meaning and patient's experience to validate what that research has shown. Because if we don't, then that research can very easily be misconstrued. And what's interesting about evidence-based practice is the concept of evidence-based practice has only really been around for the best part of the last 35 to 40 years. It was developed as a way to de-emphasize intuition in clinical decision-making. But we're at the stage now where we've lost the value and emphasis on the art form of being a clinician and clinical experience, and certainly in validating patient feedback and a patient's lived experience, to overemphasize the value of research in understanding what's important. And one of the biggest issues that I have with this ever-growing culture of emphasizing just research above all else is that it gives people who don't have the privilege of clinical experience or the validation of a patient's lived experience a voice. How many times have you seen someone who presents research that isn't in the field and has never experienced that for themselves, having a closed-minded approach that what a piece of research says is the be-all and end-all? This doesn't mean that they're incorrect, but too often the essence of what that research is saying can get lost in those conversations. Because the privilege that I have as a physiotherapist is that I can access those very same articles. I've been trained to analyze the quality of that research method, be able to look for limitations and things that stop us from being able to generalize that conclusion to the broader population, i.e. the people that I treat, and then potentially more importantly, take that information into my clinical setting and test the robustness of that conclusion with my patients in real time. And I say that it's a privilege because not everyone has access to that ability. But without that clinical experience and that patient lived experience to give research meaning, it can be almost impossible to understand what you're actually arguing with research. In its essence, despite the value that we place on research and what a conclusion says, research is inherently flawed. That's not to say that clinical experience and patient experience can be equally flawed, but research specifically has a number of limitations attached to it. To become a physiotherapist, when studying at university, we do a topic called research methods or something on that theme, where we're trained to understand how to conduct research, but how to deconstruct research to look for biases and limitations. And in Australia, one of the organisations that we lean on is an organisation called PEDRO. PEDRO is a physiotherapy evidence database where tens of thousands of physiotherapy-related research articles are indexed and measured against 10 criteria. These 10 criteria are universally accepted as being important measures of the validity of a research method conducted by a research paper. But one of the really interesting things about the PEDRO database is each year they provide a summary of all the indexed studies in their database. And because PEDRO gives each study a score out of 10, where a 0 suggests that the quality of the study is terrible and it does not pass any of those 10 criteria, and 10 is a perfect study that has no evidence of bias within the research method, as an industry and a society who places so much emphasis on what a conclusion of a research study shows, you would reasonably expect every single study to be a 10 out of 10. There's probably a world where you may allow for an 8 or a 9 out of 10, depending on which one of those criteria is missing. But what I'll do is I'll give you a second to think about what you would expect the average score to be. It's a 5 or a 6 out of 10. So out of all the studies that are indexed by the PEDRO database, if the quality of the study is a 5 or a 6 out of 10, this foundation that we put so much emphasis on may have enough bias attached to that study that the findings are not generalizable to the broader public. But yet we can very easily take the conclusion and present it as being gospel. And again, it's not to say that it isn't or that it may not be proven to be in the future, but this toxic, closed-minded culture about the importance of research alone, again, is missing very important context that can give us a potentially very different outcome. So ultimately, if a study does show that something is statistically significant and suggests that the connection that they may have found between two things in the study is potentially meaningful, we still then need to pass them through the filter of clinical experience and patient experience to give that context and meaning. Because if a study that looked at the effectiveness of quad muscle strengthening in knee pain in military-aged men, then it doesn't guarantee that that exact same result will be the same for a lady in her 90s that's consigned to a chair. It may be relevant, but the only way that we can figure this out is either by doing research specific to that subgroup, but then also pairing it up with taking that principle into a clinical setting and seeing what actually happens to that person. Because if we do quad muscle strengthening in the same way that the study did to the military-aged men, and we apply that very same program to a lady in her 90s, and she experiences benefit across sessions, and the next 90-year-old lady in the same situation experiences the same outcomes as well, then we can start to understand what might be meaningful and clinically relevant. And if we do that enough, then we can understand that we may be hitting on a very real, tangible link between quads muscle strength, knee pain, anyone across that population. So the next person who comes in with knee pain, we can have more confidence that regardless of who they are, whether they're a 14-year-old kid, a 90-year-old lady, or anything in between, that something like quads muscle strengthening is a valid strategy to give to them, while at the same time, still keeping an open mind to make sure that it is working for them and that we're not just assuming because it's worked for other people. As someone who is actively and publicly trying to better understand why my patients present with the things that they present with, and I'm very agnostic about the treatments that I give my patients in the sense that I only care about what seems to work. If it's safe, and it's effective, again, the basic tenets of evidence-based practice, and it helps them in the moment, it helps them across individual sessions, and it helps different people across individual sessions as well, you can develop a level of confidence that if there is no current research on that topic, that you are still doing something that is backed by evidence. It's backed by clinical experience, patient experience, even if there's yet to be research on that topic. But more importantly, as an experienced physiotherapist who is actively looking for results, we need to have the confidence to be able to challenge the validity of research that may suggest different things to what clinical experience and patient experience suggest. And that's not to say that the clinical experience is correct and research is wrong, but we will never get to the stage where we can modify both of those viewpoints if we aren't open-minded, responsible, and mature enough to understand the broader context of all those things. Then we're going to consistently be getting in the way of ourselves to the detriment of the people that evidence-based practice is trying to serve. It is the patient, it is the person that is struggling with something and needs to feel better. So as mentioned, what I hope to achieve with this video is that I would just like to help broaden your understanding of what research means in the context of evidence-based practice. And as I said, while not everyone has the privilege of being in a position where they can test and retest the conclusions and the hypotheses presented through research, I'm very lucky to be a clinician where I can go down these rabbit holes and test these things out for myself. I'm at the stage now as an experienced physiotherapist where I feel comfortable being able to challenge what a conclusion in a piece of research says in a very respectful, adult, and meaningful way. Naturally, I also need to be open-minded to make sure that I'm consistently critiquing the way that I do the things that I do, to make sure that my own inherent biases aren't coming to the fore and influencing what I find to be true clinically. But ultimately, if we can take what research may be suggesting, analyze how it got to that conclusion with something like the Pedro scale to make sure that it isn't lacking from a research methods perspective, we need to take that information, allow clinicians to test out the robustness of that information and how applicable it is to the people that matter. And if we can also take on board everything and anything that you feel as a patient to make sure that we have this broad understanding of what's actually going on, then and only then will we truly understand what's important in this space. So as always, I genuinely hope that that was helpful and insightful in some way. Please let me know in the comments down below if that did resonate with you. If you're someone who leans heavily on research and nothing else, let me know in the comments down below. Give me your viewpoints so I can hopefully apply meaningful context to you and your specific situation. But as always, thank you for watching. I hope that was interesting, and I'll see you next time.